Welcome back to Open Line. We are talking about mail-in voting. The rules are going to change just a little bit for November's general election from what they were in August, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about that. All right, the number to call is 615-737-PLUS. Tom Castelli from Tennessee's ACLU is here. He is the legal director for the ACLU here in the state. And Tom, I was just reading some of our Facebook comments, and a lot of people are saying if you can stand in line at the store, you can stand in line to vote, and that's just the way it should be. You should have to show up at the polls. What is the argument against that?
I think first, absentee voting is not new. We've had it for decades in the state of Tennessee, and in fact, a large percentage of our registered voting population has already had the ability to do this. Anybody over the age of 60 could absentee vote before we were in the pandemic. So that's one thing. The other thing I think to remember is that some people aren't standing in line to get their groceries. They're ordering them for delivery. They're ordering their pickup, and it specifically to avoid the situation where they have to be in a enclosed space with other people that may be infected. And another thing is, some of the stores, we're talking about large areas where social distancing is easier. You can kind of control where you go in the store. You can control how close you're standing to people. Stores are at the register marking off where people can stand. A lot of these precincts, you're in pretty small rooms, and so if you're in a small room with and waiting in a line of people for however long it takes, and sometimes if you're like me, you go early in the morning. Sometimes voting doesn't take very long, but there've been other times where you go at lunch and it might take an hour and a half, 2 hours of standing in a line. And if you're inside in a small room standing in line, your exposure potential is increasing. So there's a lot of medical reasons for it. There's a lot of personal reasons for it. It's just not as simple as, hey, if you can run out to go to the grocery store, well, what's the difference between that and voting? And then I think a final thing is, if we can make this easier and safer for people, why not do it? This is an option that we've been using for years because it's more convenient for certain people in our population. We've been doing it for people who are ill for a long time. We just right now have a different definition of ill because of a pandemic, and we need to be sympathetic to that and make it as safe as possible, because I hope everybody would agree what we want is for everybody to be able to vote who wants to vote.
A lot of people have talked about the increase for the potential of voter fraud. The president has talked about it. You hear it everywhere. So how do you fight against that?
Well, I think, first of all, there's really not a lot of evidence that there's a big increase for the potential voter fraud, and both the trial court and the Tennessee Supreme Court didn't think that there was a compelling case here, that there was a record of voting fraud with absentee balloting. There is some slightly elevated numbers of people who ballots aren't counted because people make voting errors. They don't sign it. They maybe it's not legible. That are going to be a little bit, those things might be able to get corrected or wouldn't happen in-person voting. But those are very, very small percentages. So, like I said, and before, the risk of kind of repeating myself, this is not something that's brand new. And also, we can look to other states, like certain other states. I think Colorado, Washington State have been doing vote by mail for years now, and we haven't seen this huge explosion of voting fraud cases out there. So I think it's pretty safe. I think it's something that we gotta know. We just need to learn how to expand it. And unfortunately, in this situation, we kind of had to learn quickly. But our position was that's better than keeping people from voting at all.
Let's go to the phone lines real quick. Terry is on the line. Terry, you are our first caller tonight. I always appreciate the first caller, then usually opens the floodgate. So you have the floor, Terry.
All right. I would like to know exactly what the criteria is for absentee balloting. I am a type 2 diabetic. I have acid reflux disease also, and I was just kind of curious as to what that criteria is.
Okay, I'm going to hang up on you, Terry, so you can listen to your TV. It's just easier that way, but I want you to know I'm not being rude. So we talked about this, and it doesn't sound like it's really clear, Tom.
Yeah, I don't know that it is clear at this point. I mean, like I said, what the court said is people with special vulnerabilities. And I think, right now, and if you go to the Secretary of State's website, they're saying, this is a decision the voters got to make. But for guidance, look to the CDC guidance on COVID-19, and they'll have it in front of me. But I believe type 2 diabetes is on that list as presenting someone with type 2 diabetes definitely has a heightened risk of complications with COVID. I think it's on that list that the CDC has. So, I think for now that's the guidance. I hope that maybe we'll get some more clarity on that as we kind of implement the court's decision and see how the state's going to handle it.
I do believe that at this time, I think it started last week, that you can go ahead and request a ballot for the general election. Do you know if that's the case? Can you confirm that, Tom?
Yes, it opened on August 5th.
Yeah. So if it's not real set in stone, is that a problem?
I mean, I think that there needs to be some work needs to be done to clarify all this, and because it's been so confusing. And the gentleman that just called in with that question, that's not the first time I've heard that question. Just insert another specific health condition, and so. I think it would be very helpful if there was, some definitive place for people to go to look. I would recommend that people do call the Secretary of State's office or their local election commission's office and ask. I think maybe they can get some guidance there, but certainly, hopefully as we kind of see how this is going to work, that the state will provide more clarity there, or if necessary, the courts might need to provide it.
I know that the state said they bought extra scanners to take care of the ballots when Election Day actually started last Thursday, to start scanning those, because they had to wait until then to do it, and they dedicated more people to doing that because they knew that there was an influx of those ballots. Do you know, number-wise, what else the state had to spend in order to pull this off?
I don't know exact numbers. I will say that a lot of that was before any lawsuit was filed, the state was gearing up to have the normal absentee year, because so many people, I mean, I think it's about 2% of people vote by absentee ballot in a normal year, but certainly much higher than that are eligible, even outside of the court's recent decision. So I think the state was prepared to handle an increase in absentee ballots. So some of that money was spent already in anticipation of there being an uptick. The other thing is the CARES Act that the United States Congress passed specifically gave money to the states for kind of election protection type work. And I believe, and I'm not with the state, so I can't speak for them, but I believe that some of that money was used to purchase some of that equipment that would be necessary to handle an uptick in absentee balloting.
Gotcha. Okay, we have another caller on the line. Sam is holding. Sam, thanks for being with us. Go ahead. Sam, you're on the line. Go ahead. Sam, I can hear you there. Can you hear me?
How are you tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great. Glad to hear you. Go ahead with your question or comment.
I have a comment and a question.
Okay.
Because I've had back surgery. I'm over 60. I voted absentee. My aunt's 89. She voted absentee. But the strange thing is, I personally delivered hers to the post office, put it in the slot in the post office, and we were nearing the last day to get everything in, and she called to make sure. She was telling me it hadn't gotten in there, so she checked on it, and they had not received it at the election commission office. It came the day after the election. It arrived at her house, which would have put her, not being able to vote. But luckily, she was able to vote online. My cousin was there with her. What are are we doing about the situation and the post offices and mail being backed up? That's a major concern when you're voting this way, because that's your lifeline to ballot. Are we putting anything in place to protect people from that happening? That's my question. And the comment is we need to look probably to Congress to get some help on what the president did last week, putting people in charge of the post office that are his favorites. So we've got several things working against being an honest election and making sure that everybody's vote counts. That was my thought, and I wanted to share it with other people because it does create a problem.
Thank you, Sam. Tom, any attention being paid by the ACLU to what's happening with the post office?
Well, I think the caller outlined, a specific issue. A lot of what we've been telling people is, the post office is running on, I think, reduced funding. I mean, for years, and certainly, mail can sometimes be slow. So one of the recommendations that we make is when you request that ballot, when you get it, turn it around, get it back into the mail, because it has to be received by election day. So, and so waiting, and if you're in a position where you don't have to wait until, I think you can request an absentee ballot 7 days before an election, but then they've got to process that, send you the ballot, you've got to fill it out and send it back. It's not a lot of time to do that. And I think, as the caller rightfully points out, there's a lot of problems with the post office that are playing out in the national news. My area is the state of Tennessee, not the federal post office, so I can't really speak to what's going on a national level about the post office with regard to the ACLU, but certainly I can say, any kind of, anything that's holding up the mail or taking resources out of the post office could definitely affect absentee balloting, and it should be a concern, not only for Tennessee, but for, not only during a pandemic. A lot of people vote by mail and need to vote by mail even when there's not a pandemic. So it might only have been 2%, but those are 2% of the vote, and that should mean something.
Do you think efforts to stop more widespread mail-in voting is a political issue?
I think people have made it political. I don't. I think, we've seen a lot of attempts to make voting harder. And I don't think that's, when just looking back, and I'll hit some of the ACLU's greatest hits here. Voter ID is one that we've been opposed to. It just makes it harder to vote. We firmly believe that there should be same-day voter registration. So people who want to vote in person don't need to register 30 days before an election, that they could walk into their new precinct if they've moved and register to vote that same day. These are all things that happen elsewhere that would make voting as easy as possible. And, for our position is that, this is a democracy, and voting is a right. It's a fundamental right. And we should make that easy. And I think vote by mail falls into that category of making that an option so that people who want to use it or need to use it can exercise it. Is just about making the vote as available to as many people as possible.
On that note, we're going to take another quick break. We're going to come right back. Terry and Sam, thank you for getting us started on phone calls. We welcome yours as well. The number is at the bottom of the screen. 615-737+ is the number to call. Taylor's in the back. He'll take those, and we'll get them lined up for our next half hour. Stay with us.